Okay, let's spend a few minutes now talking about various threats to information security. And really, what we're going to focus on here is some ways to categorize them, some statistics, and then taking a look at things like the TVA triple, for example. So here's some data that when we wrote the text, was fairly current. Um, and looking through this when prepping for this conversation. I think that some of these numbers are probably still about accurate, but others are not. Um, Really, what we're starting to see more and more is the use of various ways for attackers to engage employees in behaviors that bring the risk in through the perimeter themselves. The old model was that criminals would attack directly from the outside in, and they would look for vulnerabilities in individual systems, servers, what have you. Well, what we've seen here over the last few years is that OS developers, for example, have gotten much better and are much more proficient at writing secure code to lock down the operating system from the outside. And so being able to take advantage of a flaw or a weakness in an implementation of a TCP/IP stack, for example, is almost unheard of now. And the same thing with standalone applications for the most part, especially the ones that are being run by large scale businesses. It's very tough, A, to get in through the perimeter anymore, and so B, what ends up happening is we're seeing a rise in social engineering type attacks, and we're seeing attacks basically daisy chained together to lead the attacker to the end result. And what I mean by that is this. The attacker will engage in some type of social engineering exercise, whether we're talking about phishing, spear phishing, telephone usage even is on the rise, believe it or not, as a vector for social engineering. And what ends up happening is that the attacker, once the intended victim is hooked through the social media or social engineering vector, whichever approach the attacker took, the victim is then tricked in some way to either go visit a website or go download this piece of software and install it, or share credentials over the phone if, for example, the attacker chose to try and pretext their way in as tech support, for example. And so really that's the stepping stone. That's the first step, right, is that we try and hook through social engineering, then we gain a foothold in the network, and then we start either compromising the asset that we've gotten control of more thoroughly, or we use that as a pivot point within the network to then start scanning other systems and other network segments within the organization. Because, again, organizations have gotten really good at limiting malicious traffic inbound through firewall implementation, rule set development, so forth and so on. But as we all know, there are certain ports that are well known that almost always have to be left open, and so those are 80 on the TCP side, for example, for web traffic, 25 and 110. Ports 25 and 110 for mail, SMTP POP3, DNS 53, and these are holes that are poked in through the wall into the firewall because a lot of times that traffic has to be allowed. Well, social engineering vector, right? We will convince the attacker or the victim to install software, maybe, for example, and that software is configured to send traffic out through those well-known ports, and so egressing traffic gets a lot easier that way. So really, when we start looking at these different types of attacks or categories of misuse, right, really, that's really how you need to think about it, is in terms of chaining these different specific types of attacks together to ultimately achieve whatever goal it is that the attacker has in mind. The fact that some of these may work and some may not, in and of itself, isn't that big of a deal. It's what's done after that. It's what next attack is staged against that system that may allow the attacker to gain a better foothold on that system or use it to pivot on to other systems. So I'll let you go through and read these numbers at your leisure. I want to spend a few minutes now talking about this table and what it means. This is a two-column table, and the first column to the left, category of threat, is a broad definitional description of a group of specific examples, and some of those examples are listed in the column to the right. Okay, but what I need you to understand is that the category of threat, as you see here listed 1 through 12, those are not threats. The actual threats are in the right-hand column. And so if I ask you to give me a list, for example, of threats, what I'm not asking for, point blank specifically, is just a simple category of threats in the left-hand column. And why that's important is that when we then start looking at ways to prioritize threats and vulnerabilities, we start thinking about using things like the TVA spreadsheet. Okay, and so too often what I see students do is they start thinking that threat, as you can see here on the left-hand vertical column, there's threat 1, threat 2, and then all the way down to threat N. Too many times students will try and use these 12 categories of threats as data points for that left column, and that is absolutely 100% incorrect. When we talk about threats, we're talking about the examples or the potential examples that are listed in the right-hand column. Okay, a human error or failure is not a threat. That's a threat category. A threat would be an accident, an employee mistake, failure to follow policies and procedures. Those are specific examples of threats that fall into the category of human error or failure. So I want to make sure that you're clear on that so that you understand really what we're talking about here. We're talking about when we start putting together a TVA spreadsheet, we're talking about data at a very granular level. And so the work that goes into creating this spreadsheet is that you have to sit back and think about the specific types of threats that your organization may be suspect to or may be vulnerable to that may fall within these various categories of threats. So I want to make sure that you're clear. The left-hand column, those are not threats. Those are categories. The right-hand column, those are specific examples of threats potentially that your organization may be subject to. And even though you're seeing an example, some examples here that go along with each of these category groups, all of these examples may or may not be applicable to your organization. Those are just jumping off points that we use for purposes of spurring you to think about threats relative to your organization. So let's move on now and finish up the discussion here of the TVA spreadsheet here. So now that you understand kind of what the threats are there in the left-hand vertical column, across the top you'll see specific assets. And so on the top axis there, you will have a list of assets for the organization that have been created as a result of your analysis of the assets present in the organization that need some type of protection. And so you can see here that we're talking about asset 1, 2 through however many assets you find. And so finally the horizontal bar here at the bottom, priority of controls, right, means that we are looking to, in the scale of 1 to 6, 1 being the highest priority and 6 being the lowest priority, helps us determine where, when, and what we're looking at here also is the fact that how does a particular threat that you have identified that is present to the organization, how does that impact that particular asset? And so we go cell by cell and you determine whether or not this the priority in terms of asset control that you need to implement, how that factors in when cross-hairing threat 1 versus asset 1, and then threat 2 versus asset 2, and you go through that step by step, and the ultimate result here, even though this is in black and white, you should always look to do yours in color because they are easier to see. Right. The idea here is that you end up with a color-coded representation of where we need to focus protection of assets against a list of threats that you have come up with. So that's how you interpret all that, and that's how you prepare that document. And I believe we also discussed the TVA triple in greater detail in your Principles of Information Security book as well. If you don't recall this, you need to go do some outside research, get yourself up to speed on this, because there's some homework that's due where you're going to have to create one of these yourself. So you're going to end up having to come up with a list of assets for the organization in the textbook in the case project that I've got you working on, as well as the threats that are present there as well. So, that's one way to look at dealing with threats and classifying threats to assets and so forth and so on. We could also look at it from the attacker's perspective, and so, or different perspectives from the organization perspective, right? So when we, like down the last few, the cyber terrorist and hacktivist, right? Their perspective is that they have a political or some type of ideological problem with your organization, or in the case of terrorism, they could be simply paid to be doing a job by some other organization that has a philosophical or political problem with your organization, but lacks the resources to be able to engage in this type of criminal behavior themselves. So they'll go out and hire groups to do things like that. Freakers, crackers, when we start thinking about these types of people, we're talking about people who have specific technical skill sets. Maybe they are good at compromising software, what have you. Script kiddies, that's almost an insulting term. The idea behind a script kiddie is that they don't really know what they're doing at a very low level detail. They have simply been able to go out and obtain the tool to use to engage in some type of malicious activity or behavior. And so I've got a lot of friends and colleagues out in the field who kind of chuckle and say script kiddies and, kind of disregard them and blow them off. But I kind of take the other approach, which is I don't care if they know how to put a gun together. I care about the fact that they can pull a trigger on a gun and I'm still dead. It doesn't matter if they knew how to build the gun. They knew how to use the gun. And so, I personally don't disregard them as a lightened threat or a less of a threat, because they're able to get hold of what they want to use and may be successful in using it against my organization. So my favorite word in the world, he says as he chuckles, hackers. Hackers, hacking, and I've been hacked, and so forth and so on. Back in the day, that word simply meant a tinkerer, somebody who was able to hack at something to try and figure out what else it could do. Right? There's a famous saying that says, "I don't want to know what it's designed to do. I want to know what it can do." And so back in the day, the idea there was nothing evil-minded or nefarious about the first wave of hackers. They're simply curious, right? And so from that perspective, I want you all to be the H word. I want you to be curious. I want you to not just accept when a vendor says, for example, yes, we can block A, B, and C types of activity. Really? Show me. Right? Because at the end of the day, it's your network that you've got to protect, and you've got to make sure that that kind of protection is happening. And so, take things apart. Don't be afraid to tinker with things. You're going to break some things. Understand how things work. Don't just purchase the box with the shiny buttons on the front and be done with it. Get deeper into it. What happens if I throw this type of network traffic at this device? What will it do? Well, I know the vendor said it would do A, B, and C. Well, maybe the vendor's right. Maybe it does A, B, and C. Maybe it also does D, E, and F that they didn't talk about. And so maybe now you have a new set of problems, or potentially a new set of controls that you can put into place to help you determine things a little quicker. When we talk about hacking in that context, I'm good with it. But we've got too many people who use the word hacker for too many different things, and we've gotten to the point where the word hacker actually has no definition. Because I've seen friends who have left their Facebook accounts logged in on a computer, and their kids will log in and say, "Ha ha, I hacked my mom or dad's email account." Well, no, you didn't. You just took control of a computer for a little bit. You didn't hack anything. But that's how some people think of a hacker. Some people think that the hacker is this evil, nefarious criminal type wearing a hoodie somewhere in a Starbucks, trying to have a go at a network. The word is overused, and it's gotten to the point where it doesn't mean much of anything. Here we go. Just various different ways that you can look at to think about threats and getting them organized logically so that you can be thorough when trying to determine which threats are appropriate to your organization and which ones really aren't. So with that, I believe that's all I've got for now for this portion of our conversation. Thank you very much for your time.